Lukata Mjumbe is the pastor of the historic Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church of Princeton, New Jersey. Witherspoon Street's longest serving pastor was the Reverend William Drew Robeson and the father of Paul Robeson. Like father and son, Reverend Mjumbe is a deeply committed advocate and organizer, talented theater artist, and respected scholar committing to the radical transformation and salvation of oppressed communities and marginalized people. He is a high honors political science graduate of Morehouse College. Shout out to Morehouse College, my brother. And Princeton Theological Seminary in Religion and Society, Masters of Divinity and Masters of Theology. He also serves as the Faith Policy Advisor to Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. Welcome, Pastor Mjumbe. Talk about activism. We talk about it sort of across the country, especially during Black History Month. And we can sometimes overlook those very local struggles, the way that even a national figure like Paul Robeson has actually impacted, of course, international questions and nationally, but right here in Princeton. So I want to ask you, Reverend Mjumbe, how does Paul Robeson's legacy speak to the Princeton area and his relationship to the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church in particular?
I think in some ways you cannot understand Princeton. You certainly can't understand Black Princeton if you don't understand the legacy of the Robeson family. Paul Robeson was the son, one of the sons of the gentleman over my shoulder here, Reverend William Drew Robeson, who was the longest serving pastor of Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. We're celebrating our 181-year anniversary this year. And when we understand the Robeson family, William Drew Robeson, his mother, Louisa Bustillo Robeson, we understand how Black excellence and Black commitment emerged up out of this place alongside an affluent white racist community, in all honesty, but refused to be silent. Within the legacy of the Robeson family, you have resistance to the racism of Woodrow Wilson, who was then the president of Princeton University before he became president of the United States, as he demanded that one of Paul's older brothers be able to enroll at Princeton University, but the response was that we don't have coloreds here at Princeton University. Here you see when you had a man like William Drew Robeson who taught his children Greek and Latin at very early ages and emphasized not only academic excellence, but moral excellence, stood up against lynching during the McKinley administration, stood up against poverty, was someone who he himself had escaped from slavery, William Drew Robeson, but instilled and planted all of those seeds within his children and within Paul, only to suffer great and tremendous consequences, ultimately being pushed out of the church, having his call dissolved, and ended up right around the corner where his wife eventually succumbed to injuries from a fire that came from, she had lost her sight, a coal had fallen onto her clothes, she caught a fire and ultimately died. But kept pushing, but kept fighting, but refused to lose, and always emphasized taking the right side. And so when I think about Princeton, this local community, I see the inspiration to academic excellence, the inspiration to artistic excellence, the inspiration to see beyond the place where you came from and to take it all around the world. But in Paul Robeson, even before I became a pastor and was inspired by his father, Paul Robeson inspired me as an activist, as an organizer, as someone who thought locally, who worked locally but had visions that were global. And he continues every single day to be a role model, a standard. We can learn lessons, both good and bad. We can see how much he was ahead of his time, because the things that we have to fight today, the things that we have to face today, and the things that we have not yet fully had to confront today, we can see within the legacy of Paul Robeson as a child all the way up to when he became an international celebrity advocate and change maker.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that background. Sometimes, we see these leaders as if they came out of nowhere. as if they didn't have a
He had a
family,
mama and a daddy,
mama
brothers
and
and
a dad.
sisters, and a community that birthed him, that took care of him, and that still loves him today.
Absolutely. That's so important to realize, even during Black History Month. Of course, we in the mainstream talk about Dr. King as if Dr. King just sort of sprung out of Morehouse College without a Benjamin Elijah Mays, or without, more importantly, a movement that made him possible. I would imagine that's the same thing when it comes to Paul Robeson and
Yeah.
any
And Martin Luther King
of the
had a
Black,
mama and a daddy too.
and a mama and a dad, Daddy King,
That were
right?
important.
Very important.
And Mama King.
So part of what you're saying is also reminding me, when I first got to Princeton for my doctoral degree, to start my doctoral degree, the undergrads were protesting on the heels of the Ferguson uprising. This is 2014. And one of the things that they were pushing for was a change of the School of Public Policy, which was named the Woodrow Wilson School. And so the history that you're talking about speaks directly not only to what was happening nationally in Ferguson and across the country, but what was happening right at Princeton University. And I think it's important what you said about Paul Robeson's and that relationship between President Woodrow Wilson, because while the students were fighting against the naming of the school being under Woodrow Wilson, we're not always seeing ourselves in the tradition of a Paul Robeson who had already been, right, fighting and resisting these broader structures that go back to the very beginning of Princeton's history. So I appreciate you bringing that to the table today. Reverend Mjumbe, Brother Lukata, who also went to the illustrious Morehouse College. I just have to say that because, you know, we don't always get a chance to say that in places like Princeton. Went to the illustrious Morehouse College at a different time than I did. I'm curious about, in terms of your work in ministry, how does the spirit of Paul Robeson, I mean, I've seen you preach before. I've organized with you around some things. So I just want to give some space for you to talk about, what does this look like as a pastor? What does this look like as a minister? Talk about that tradition a little bit.
Well, you know, there are many Christians, at least, I don't know if they wear them anymore, but back in the day, they used to wear these "What would Jesus do" kind of bracelets. I never wore one of those. But when you ask the question, what would Jesus do? It's because Jesus gives you a model of how you're supposed to live. And I've always been convinced that the best way of teaching people about Jesus Christ as a Christian minister is to try to live like he lived, and love like he loved, and teach the way that he taught, and sacrifice the way that he sacrificed. And in the same way, when I think about Paul Robeson, or even William Drew Robeson, as a pastor, as an activist, as an organizer, I frequently ask the question, what would Paul do? What would William Drew do? Just like I had asked for years, what would Malcolm do? Because I see a line, you know, revolutionary psychiatrist Frantz Fanon said that each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its own mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And we can see Robeson and the work against the systematic destruction of a group of people, genocide in whole or in part, going back to the early 1950s and beyond. But then we can also see how the same language that he was using when he declared that he was an Afro-American, and his commitment to be an African and to learn what it meant to be an African and to learn African languages, that then showed up when you find Malcolm X, who calls himself eventually an Afro-American, and also charges genocide and talks about human rights and the difference between civil rights and human rights, and the importance of connecting the struggle of Black people in the United States and in the Americas, and forming the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And then we see that continuing after Malcolm with the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Movement. And so in my view, the way that we teach, the way that we preach, the way that we continue the legacy is by living it. So as a pastor, as a minister, the passage that inspires me is Isaiah 61 and Luke 4. that says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, release to the captive, sight to the blind, liberation for all who are oppressed. And so for me, it's very easy to integrate Paul and Jesus and William Drew and Malcolm together as a signpost and a guidepost for Christian ministry. And it must show up in our preaching and our teaching and our advocacy and our pastoral care. I can't imagine Paul Robeson as a singer and as an actor and as an artist separated and divorced from his identity and his commitment as an advocate, as an activist, as a freedom fighter, as a revolutionary. And I don't want to imagine myself, and unfortunately there are many models of pastors and preachers that you can see a disconnection, but I don't want to be one that can ever imagine myself, and I don't want others to be able to imagine my ministry as a pastor and a preacher and as a Christian, someone who seeks to be Christ-like, like Christ, separated from my identity as an activist, as an organizer, as an advocate. Jesus Christ was a Black revolutionary. So in order to be a Christian, in my view, to be Christ-like means to be like a Black revolutionary. And so blending them, integrating them together, it helps me to oftentimes pause. Because I know that there are consequences. I mean, it was said earlier by Dr. Redmond, Paul Robeson paid a very heavy price, as did so many before him and after him, for standing up and speaking out. I am in the building next door to the home where Paul Robeson was born, where he grew up the early part of his life. But I know that his father suffered serious consequences when he spoke up against white supremacy, when he spoke up against the way that Black people who had come out of slavery were continuing to be treated supposedly in the free North. So we can learn from Paul Robeson, we can celebrate, we can look back, but we have to know that there has been a continuation of struggle against genocide, for peace, for freedom, for justice, for human rights. And at every step, there have been consequences. At every step, that when you have found women and men who stood up as freedom fighters, that there have been a heavy weight. And you know, many people want to just talk about Paul Robeson, the deep baritone, Old Man River, and that's so important as a part of what he was. But would you have really loved Paul Robeson when he was alive, when he was being burned in effigy up in upstate New York, when he was having his passport seized, when he was thinking that he had been poisoned, when he was given electroshock treatment, when he was being attacked and vilified before the House Un-American Activities Committee? And so when we look back, you know, and Malcolm X said it well, and we'll be remembering his death, his assassination, a week from on Monday, February the 21st. He was asked once, well, which politicians do you actually respect? And he said, well, you know, my standard tends to be, I look to see who is being attacked the most, and that's who I assume is doing the most on behalf of Black people. And he pointed to people like Reverend Adam Clayton Powell. As a model and an example. So it gives me reason for inspiration as a Christian minister, as a pastor, but it also gives me reason to be humble, wise, careful, strategic, and connected. I think we see in Paul Robeson someone who, as much as people came to support him and celebrate him in the earlier part of his life, that when the fires of oppression came down upon him, he felt alone in some places. And Dr. King said, and we may not always remember all the words of our enemies, but we never forget the silence of our friends. And so there's some lessons to be learned from Paul Robeson, from William Drew Robeson, and all of those who came before them, and for us today. Let us not think because this is fashionable and in style in some ways in 2022, or because we were all able to march for months in 2020 around George Floyd, that there are not deep and heavy consequences. And some of us in this generation and this next generation have already begun to suffer some of those consequences. And we should know that history will show us that there is more yet to come.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, those rich comments, you know, as you were talking, there's so much to get into, but as you were talking, it reminded me of when you told me, like the second or third time I met you, you said, I'm a Nat Turner Christian. And
Amen.
those qualifications that you would give to the type of way you minister and show up in the world, I think is really inspiring. Also reminds me of what it means to be a student of Professor Redmond. You talked about being, thank you so much. And just for the sake of time, Pastor Mjumbe, if you can talk very briefly about the work that you're doing. I know you're doing so much, but I saw you put in the chat. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
And I'll be real brief. I mean, the main thing I'm doing is preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ and seeking to live it out every single day. But when I cited Luke 4, he said, "Release to the captives," and I have been working for more than half of my life for the freedom of a freedom fighter from the civil rights and liberation movement, Sundiata Acoli. He is 85 years old, has been in prison since 1973, almost 50 years. And we have been actively working to bring him home. He is an important leader in our history. And today he's an 85-year-old man who they are trying to bring about an unofficial death penalty as a result of his sentence. You can't say that you loved Malcolm. You can't say that you loved Paul Robeson. You can't say that you love the freedom fighters of the past when we have freedom fighters today who have been in prison almost 50 years. And Sundiata Acoli, I would just encourage people, go to hashtag Bring Sundiata Home. There's a lot of information. I was on a freedom fast for 67 days, completely from food, working. I'm been transitioning off now for the last couple of weeks. There are people all around the country, all around the world. We have over 20,000 signatures calling for the governor of New Jersey to grant him clemency, compassionate release. We had oral arguments a week ago, 2 weeks ago, before the New Jersey Supreme Court. He has already served double the amount of time that he should have served if he was absolutely guilty of everything he's been convicted of. The reason why he is still in prison is because of vengeance, is because of this desire to continue to make a political argument. Sundiata Acoli was the driver of the car that Joanne Chesimard, Sada Shakur was in back in 1973 that resulted in a terrible, tragic shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike, which left Zaid Shakur murdered, that left New Jersey State Trooper Officer Werner Forrester murdered, that left another New Jersey State Trooper, James Harper, injured, and left Assata Shakur shot in the back and shot in the back of the hand. And Sundiata was also shot and lost consciousness. He has been in prison since 1973, was eligible for parole in the spring of 1992. And he has had almost 30 years without a disciplinary infraction. So go to I put in the chat, Sundiata Acoli FC. .org is the website, but if you put in hashtag Bring Sundiata Home, SUNDIATA, you can get more information. You can sign the petition. You can send a postcard. You can raise your voice, because we must release the captives. We must bring them home. It is an act of genocide when we look at the prison population that we have in this country. That is one of the expressions of genocide in this country, and has been so since the early 1970s. Sundiata was in high school when Paul Robeson took the petition before the United Nations charging genocide. And here he is at 85 years old, having been COVID-19 positive, early stages of dementia, a number of health ailments, and we have to bring him home.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, very important to always not just remember, but continue to fight for political prisoners, and to know that there are political prisoners in this place called the United States. I was politicized by Mumia Abu Jamal, and I wouldn't be here if it were not for his brilliance, for the fact that he's not just a symbol of someone that we can champion for, but someone who's actually given us so much to think about, to envision, so on and so forth. So thank you so much for saying that. There's a few. Reverend Mjumbe, can you give us a last word before we end it?
Dr. King said we must use time creatively with the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. Walk outside, open your eyes, listen to people, connect with people, love people as an action verb. Love isn't a feeling or a secondhand emotion. Love is commitment. Love is action. And join an organization. If you can't find an organization, form one. This is the call right now. Each generation has to do it right now. And there are multiple opportunities. And let me say this, don't think you have to get it perfect to start. You will become more perfect and more complete, and you will learn this struggle as you do it, as you fail, as you succeed, as you struggle. And don't expect it to happen overnight. And so I would say join whatever you can. Join a church, join a fraternity, join a nonprofit, an NGO. Get involved with an organization, because we have to be organized. Our enemy is very well organized. And if we don't get organized as a community of advocates and activists, where it's very popular oftentimes to be the independent free agent that waxes eloquently and has no accountability, but the people will hold you accountable in ways that you will never hold yourself accountable. And so I would just encourage people to walk outside. You can put on your mask, but walk outside and let's get to work, because we don't know how much time that we have left, and we are losing people every day that don't need to be lost. Because as George Jackson said, fascism is already here, and the time is now.